Welcome to the applicant briefing for DR 4754, the major disaster declaration issued for the state of Maine in response to the severe storm and flooding events from December 17th through the 21st of 2023. This is Naomi Petley, Maine's Public Assistance Officer, along with my fellow Public Assistance team members Harley Morgan and Sarah Fuller. Our agency's role is to assist eligible applicants through the federal disaster declaration process. This briefing will cover the process for repairs to public infrastructure only. Help for individuals and businesses is managed by our individual assistance team. Details on how to contact them will be on a later slide. Please note that eligible applicants for this event include Androscoggin, Franklin, Hancock, Oxford, Penobscot, Piscataquis, Somerset, Waldo, and Washington counties. Kennebec is still gathering documentation and may be added to the declaration pending validation. Given that everyone has varying schedules and we've adapted to remote meetings, this session will be conducted virtually. We will also have it posted online shortly following this presentation with a link from the MEMA PA webpage. This briefing contains all the information you need to begin the reimbursement process. Should you have questions following this briefing, please reach out to us at any time at maine.recovery@maine.gov. Before we move into the material, I would like to take a moment to express my sincere gratitude to all those that participated in the initial damage assessments following this storm. Your communities suffered an enormous amount of damage. The joint preliminary damage assessments with FEMA enabled us to pursue this declaration and will help bring recovery assistance to your towns and agencies. You are all incredibly diligent in capturing the damages you incurred, providing thorough documentation, and working with your county, state, and federal teams to enable this declaration. We know many of you are engaged with multiple declared disasters and may still be gathering information for the January storms and flooding. We appreciate your efforts, and if you have any questions, please drop them in the Q&A, and we'll be tracking them as we go along. Today, we will provide an overview of the Public Assistance Program, otherwise referred to as the PA program, including specifics for accessing FEMA's grants portal system and information on what you'll need to provide for project reconciliation and closeout. We will be going over a lot of information, and some of it is specific. Therefore, we are providing a copy of this presentation with the slide notes for your reference at any time. If it is a specific question regarding your organization or reimbursement eligibility question, again, please email maine.recovery@maine.gov. President Biden issued a major disaster declaration for Maine on January 30th for this storm. FEMA assigns a number to every federally declared disaster, and the disaster number for this December storm is 4754. The incident period for this event is December 17th through the 21st of 2023. This means that eligible expenditures for activities conducted on or after this time frame can be submitted to FEMA for reimbursement. Any damages that occurred after that date or from previous or subsequent storms are ineligible to claim for this event. There is a lot of information in this briefing. For those of you new to this process, it may seem overwhelming. Here are a few key things we want you to know up front that will hopefully guide your expectations through the many steps of public assistance. First, you will be asked to provide the documentation for your damages multiple times by different FEMA teams. If you participated in the preliminary damage assessment process, or PDA, this information and more will be required by your assigned FEMA representative and a site inspection team later in the process if one is required. Always keep all documentation for expenses and labor related to the incident. Second, FEMA staff have varying timeframes they can be assigned to region or disasters. This can cause changes in staffing even in the midst of a recovery process for one disaster. They work to keep staff consistent and, if necessary, facilitate smooth transitions. The timeline between experiencing the event, getting a declaration, and submitting requests for public assistance is relatively quick. However, the process for compiling damage reports and estimates, documenting completed and work to be completed, then obligating and sending funds for a project is much lengthier. This may take several months to a year or more, depending on the complexity of the project. During your project development, there will be follow-up questions from FEMA project staff and subject matter experts, need for additional documentation, and more. Please respond to these as a priority. Delays with RFIs can create multiple issues in projects getting obligated and potential withdrawal from the process. What is public assistance? The key to remember is that it is a reimbursement program, not like other forward-looking federal grant programs. FEMA will provide financial assistance for eligible expenses that are a direct result of the declared event. Generally, the PA program provides grant funding for many activities, including debris removal and repair or replacement of infrastructure. Eligible applicants include municipalities, state agencies, certain private nonprofits, and tribal organizations. Most of the applicants for this disaster will be government, but we may have a few private nonprofits or PMPs participate. For this event, FEMA will provide 75% reimbursement funding for eligible expenses. The state of Maine will contribute 15%, and the applicant will be responsible for 10% of the eligible project costs. You see some initial deadlines here. It is typical for work to be completed within these timeframes following the declaration. If more time is needed, though, extensions are possible, and we'll touch more upon this in a short while. Before we get too deep into the weeds regarding the PA program, let's go over some key definitions. A recipient is a non-federal entity that receives a federal award directly from a federal awarding agency, in this case FEMA, to carry out an activity under a federal program, the PA program. In this case, the recipient is the state of Maine, with MEMA managing the program. An applicant is a non-federal entity submitting an application for assistance under the recipient's federal award. Often you will hear us use the terms applicant and subrecipient interchangeably. Projects are the activities that are grouped together to become a subaward under the state of Maine's award when approved. Many of you are becoming increasingly familiar with FEMA speak. We still have a quick guide that may be useful, and we are adding terms to it all the time. This can be found on the MEMA webpage. As you all know, we are experiencing more frequent and stronger storms. Recent months resulted in multiple disaster declarations, and many sites that were damaged in one storm were damaged again, sometimes at a greater extent and before permanent work could be completed. As we assemble individual projects for these locations, we will be working with FEMA to determine which damages and repairs can be categorized for each disaster event. Your assigned FEMA representative will be working with you to review and organize damages for reimbursement on a case-by-case basis to pursue the best reimbursement options for your community. Now I'm going to turn this presentation over to Harley, who is going to discuss the 4 factors of eligibility.
There are 4 factors that play into overall eligibility: the applicant, the facility, the work, and the cost. This pyramid shows the tiers of eligibility. All 4 tiers must be eligible to obtain FEMA funding. We will cover all of these, with the first being the bottom tier, eligible applicants. On this slide, you can see the types of eligible applicants and determine what group you fall into. For most, if not all of you watching this briefing, you'll fall into the local government or tribal category. P&P organizations are urged to contact their county's emergency manager to provide information about their organization. The information will be submitted to FEMA to determine eligibility for a public assistance grant. For some disasters, P&Ps, businesses, and individuals can apply to the Small Business Administration. If you have nonprofit organizations in this category, please follow up with us after this briefing. The next tier of eligibility is the facility. The structures or buildings that you are looking to repair must be located within the declared locality and the legal responsibility of the applicant. For P&Ps, however, they must show they operate an eligible facility, for example, a hospital, clinic, etc., in order to be considered an eligible applicant. Applicants are also required to pursue any reimbursement for insurance coverages prior to seeking FEMA funding. In some cases, many applicants may be receiving federal aid from multiple federal agencies. You cannot receive funding for the same work or facility from multiple sources. In other words, no double dipping. If the facility or property is under the jurisdiction of another federal program or department, it is not eligible for FEMA reimbursement. The same goes for insurance. If you have facilities that were damaged and insurance covers the repairs for those, FEMA will not reimburse those expenses. FEMA may cover the difference that insurance does not cover. The next tier is work. Applicants must clearly identify the work and how it is directly related to the storm event. Labor is one of the more complex areas for FEMA reimbursement. We will not go into specifics here today, but always be sure to track any and all labor from your staff working on the incident. For costs to be eligible, they must be incurred within the approved period of performance. For emergency protective measures, categories A and B, work must be completed within 6 months of the declaration. For permanent work, categories C through G, work must be completed within 18 months of the declaration. In addition to having to ask permission of FEMA via MEMA for time extensions, if the scope of the project changes for engineering or other reasons, you must make a request through MEMA or the eligibility for funding may be affected. That is, some or all of the project may not be reimbursed. This is not a case where asking for forgiveness is better than permission. Here we see a listing of the standard FEMA work categories. These are segmented into emergency work, categories A and B, which covers those activities that you undertake to protect life and property at the onset of an incident. For this event, it might be securing roadways, removing debris from roadways or culverts, or creating alternate routes to avoid a dangerous situation. Permanent work is those activities that restore the facility or infrastructure to the condition it was prior to the incident or storm. These categories, C through G, cover the areas where permanent work is applied. Here we review the types of costs that are eligible. For cost eligibility considerations, everything must be documented and comply with appropriate guidelines. They must also be reasonable and necessary to protect the public from the incident. An applicant must have a minimum of $3,900 of eligible costs for a project to be submitted. A word of caution is that the $3,900 minimum threshold must be met for each project category. However, this does not mean that every individual location of damage needs to meet this figure. Force account labor costs are for the applicant's employees, both full-time and those that may have been hired as temporary employees to address the incident. For permanent employees, only overtime used on DR 4754 work is eligible for Cat B work. For temporary or contract employees hired to work on DR 4754 activities, both regular and overtime costs are eligible. FEMA's criteria for reimbursing straight-time labor costs differ depending on the type of employee and whether that employee is performing emergency work or permanent work. For permanent work, both straight-time and overtime labor costs are eligible for both budgeted and unbudgeted employee hours. For emergency work, only overtime labor is eligible for budgeted employee hours. In addition, fringe benefit costs for eligible hours are also eligible for reimbursement, and you may be asked to calculate an average fringe benefit hourly rate for your employees and provide your pay policy. You will need to document all related labor hours and provide any contract documentation if you have contract labor to conduct eligible work. Force account equipment costs are for equipment you own, lease, or purchase for necessary use for DR 4754. The equipment or vehicles you own are normally reimbursed based on an hourly rate. Leased or rented equipment is based on the rental or lease agreement, and purchased equipment may be reimbursed based on the purchase cost minus salvage value. When claiming reimbursement on an hourly rate, FEMA allows credit for a full workday when the equipment is used for half the workday or more. Once again, we stress documentation. FEMA will want to know the type of equipment, including the size and capacity, date, hours used, location, purpose, operator information, and rate. Copies of logbooks may also be required. The current equipment rates are located on the MEMA Public Assistance webpage, and there is a link to current rates provided at the end of this presentation. The current rates are the 2023 rates. Force account materials are those that you either use from your stock or purchase for use in the event. If you have invoices for your stock items, they can be used to establish costs, or you can get 3 quotes from local vendors to establish costs. Examples of these items may include gravel and culverts. Donated resources, whether labor, equipment, or materials, can be used to offset the local cost share of emergency work. For this incident, there may not be a great deal of donated labor and resources, but it's an element to be considered. Some communities have had resident groups help with debris clearing or other activities. It is essential that you document all donated resources in detail with the who, what, when, where, and why. Donated resources should be captured on a separate project application, even if they do not total more than $3,900. I'm now going to turn it over to Sarah to discuss some special considerations for environmental and historic preservation.
For any FEMA reimbursed project, applicants will be required to document that they have taken the following considerations into account: hazard mitigation, environmental requirements, historic preservation and cultural resources, floodplain management, and insurance requirements. If you have an area that frequently and repeatedly experiences damage from storms, and/or this area has been identified in the County Hazard Mitigation Plan, there may be opportunities for additional funding and mitigation work. More on this resource towards the end of the presentation. Environmental requirements need to ensure that all practical means to protect, restore, and enhance the environment are taken. Historic preservation involves any property eligible for listing on the National Register of Historic Places. These require special consideration under the National Historic Preservation Act. Floodplain management. For any project within or affecting the floodplain must be reviewed to ensure that it meets the requirements of the executive orders on floodplain management and the protection of wetlands. Insurance requirements. Applicants must utilize actual or anticipated insurance proceeds for the eligible project costs for insured facilities. Applicants are also required to obtain and maintain insurance for their facilities as a condition of PA funding. Lastly, for flood-damaged facilities located within a special flood hazard area that are not covered by flood insurance, federal assistance will be reduced by the maximum flood insurance proceeds which would have been payable if the facility had been insured. You'll all have access to FEMA's green sheet for this event. Important details on these environmental and historic preservation considerations, as well as contact info for various agencies that can help. FEMA drafts these for each event with state-specific details. Some specific environmental considerations we need to focus on in Maine involve our many bodies of water. Fresh water requires work to be done at or below the high water mark. Be very mindful that many streams, even small ones, are designated as Atlantic salmon habitat and have special design requirements around culverts and other infrastructure. If you don't know where these habitats are, your FEMA rep and/or the Maine DEP can help outline these locations. You'll need DEP approval before starting work in these areas, as well as the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Tree removal is something that comes with nearly all of our disasters, regardless of the season. Your FEMA team will help with the needed consultation with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. You'll be asked if the planned removal is a flush cut or a root ball removal. As noted here, you'll also want to avoid tree removal between April 15th and October 31st. Excavation and disturbance of ground for repairs may require consultation with the State Historic Preservation Officer, another piece that your dedicated FEMA and EHP staff will help address. Given the number of declared disasters in the state, both DEP and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers are backlogged with requests for disaster recovery work, in addition to their usual workloads. You will need the correspondence in writing or email if you need a permit or not. Even an email request from you inquiring about the permit needs for your project to the appropriate agency will be critical in moving things along. If you know or suspect your project may need permits, please get your request into the queue sooner rather than later. It can make a difference in your project being obligated in a timely manner. MEMA continues to have conversation with our partner agencies to improve the process for these permitting requirements. As part of the Inflation Reduction Act, FEMA will fund costs associated with low-carbon materials, even when the costs are higher than those for conventional materials, to help cut carbon pollution and build back cleaner and more resilient. These include certain eligible low-carbon materials such as concrete, asphalt, glass, and steel that have a global warming potential lower than the estimated industry averages of similar products in North America. This is a new program and Maine is participating. Details can be discussed with your FEMA representative during the project development phase. Additionally, if you have eligible mitigation projects, there are additional opportunities for materials and efficient technologies that can be applied. Our mitigation officer, Heather Dumais, will be able to provide additional information. More on mitigation resources later in this briefing. FEMA will reimburse an applicant's direct and indirect administrative costs incurred for submitting and processing its FEMA projects. Reimbursement is based on actual, documented administrative costs and may be awarded up to 5% of the total of your obligated projects. FEMA automatically creates a separate Category Z project for management costs for each applicant. Applicants must submit full documentation of management costs. The federal share on Cat Z projects is 100%, subject to the 5% cap based on total obligated project costs. Please begin capturing your administrative costs, including the costs incurred to attend today's applicant briefing. You'll need to document your administrative costs before requesting closeout and reimbursement for your Cat Z project. Contract procurement must be conducted in a manner providing full and open competition. Contracts should be competitively bid unless one of the following applies. The item is only available from a single source. The awarding agency authorizes non-competitive proposals. After solicitation of a number of sources, competition is determined to be inadequate, or the contract will eliminate or reduce an immediate threat to life, public health, or safety. If you have a sole source contract, documentation and justification will be required for the project application. Some details of this are noted on the following slide. Many of our communities are small and everyone knows everyone and serves on multiple boards and committees. Your town should be sure to have a conflict of interest policy in the procurement policy to ensure that the people making contract decisions and overseeing eligible work are not closely tied. For example, if the select board member or the public work director's brother owns the local tree service company, they cannot be involved in selecting that company as the debris removal firm for their own town or overseeing the work the company does. Additional specific information can be found at the FEMA.gov/procurement disaster assistance team site noted here. If you have specific questions about contracts as you pull together and submit projects, your FEMA PDMG will be able to assist you. Your town may not have a written procurement policy. You may have an informal way of managing large purchases over a certain dollar amount and steps taken to avoid conflict of interest. It can be helpful to have these practices documented. Here are some resources from FEMA for the elements they look for when approving PA reimbursements. If the town does not have a procurement policy, you may choose to adopt the state's policy as your default, or you could also craft your own. If you don't know where to start with your own policy, Maine Municipal Association often has examples and experts to assist towns in creating these documents. As noted, the conditions for sole source contracts are detailed here. If you have used these or need to, please work with your PDMG to document these and ascertain eligibility for your project application. Lump sum contracts are acceptable and require minimum monitoring by the applicant, as you don't have to document the quantity separately. Time and material contracts can be used, but there are some restrictions. FEMA may reimburse costs incurred under a T&M contract only if all of the following apply. No other contract was suitable. The contract has a ceiling price that the contractor exceeds at its own risk. And the non-state entity can demonstrate it provided a high degree of oversight to obtain reasonable assurance the contractor used efficient methods and effective cost controls. Be aware of types of contracts that may jeopardize reimbursement. A cost plus percentage of cost contract is where a contractor says they will do the work for whatever it costs plus a percentage of that cost. For example, the contractor spends $100,000 on the work and the percentage agreed on is 15%. The contractor receives $115,000. In this type of contract, there is no incentive for the contractor to work efficiently and swiftly. The more time he takes, the larger the profit. This is an ineligible contract with FEMA and may make your project ineligible if you use it. Contracts that state that they are contingent upon the applicant receiving reimbursement from FEMA are also ineligible. Examples include contracts that say the applicant will pay the contractor whatever FEMA pays, or will pay if or when FEMA pays. Such contracts are ineligible. You must act using your normal procurement procedures without any reference to reimbursement from FEMA. The last point is, avoid contracting with a debarred contractor. Make sure your contracting folks are checking to make sure they are not dealing with one, as that contract will also be ineligible.
Many of you will be familiar with the flow of events and this process from the incident to the closeout. Many, if not all of you, are currently engaged in one or more disasters. For this disaster, the traditional process for seeking reimbursement will be in place. We want to extend our thanks to the local, county, and state officials who helped gather all the necessary information to get us to this point. We recognize that a great many details were requested in a short period of time as FEMA sought to validate costs and estimates to meet our thresholds. In the next couple days, if you haven't already, please go into Grants Portal and file for your request for public assistance. We will be reviewing them as they come in and working with our FEMA team to have Program Delivery Managers, or PDMGs, assigned to each of you. This is the customer service reference you see here. Your PDMG will work with you to make sure you have all your eligible expenses and documentation in order to submit a project. You'll review and sign off to submit the project, and then, pending internal FEMA review, funds will be awarded or obligated. These awards come back to the state, and we help process the award and payment to the applicants. We'll walk you through some key parts of the Grants Portal and project submission process. Keep in mind at any time, if you have questions, you can reach out to your dedicated FEMA PDMG or MEMA for help. Grants Portal is a web-based application used for managing FEMA public assistance projects and works best with the Firefox web browser. Grants Portal is the applicant side of this system, and Grants Manager is the FEMA side of the same database. If your organization already has a Grants Portal account due to participation in one of Maine's recent federally declared disasters, when you log into your Grants Portal account, you may see the banner on the screen prompting you to submit your RPA for the new declaration for your event. Simply click as directed and follow the instructions as prompted. If you do not have a Grants Portal account established or need access for a new account, please contact main.recovery@maine.gov and someone from the PA team will work with you to establish your account. Other applicants, such as private nonprofit organizations, should work through the main.recovery@maine.gov mailbox to have an invitation sent to your organization. The process will be streamlined if you provide the following information: the legal name of your organization and the first and last name, phone number, and email address of the person who will be responsible for the Grants Portal account. Additional users can be added by the primary administrator after approved by MEMA. If you are a nonprofit organization, also include if you have a 501c3 designation or not. We will now discuss one of the most important topics for this applicant's briefing, which is the Request for Public Assistance, or RPA. The RPA is formal acknowledgement of an applicant's intent to request reimbursement from the FEMA PA program. For 4754, RPAs must be submitted by February 29th, or Leap Day. The RPA must be submitted within 30 days of the declaration. After this date, FEMA will not accept any request for public assistance for this incident. We highly recommend that applicants submit their RPAs as soon as possible so we can review them and forward to FEMA for their review and approval. If you went through main.recovery@main.gov for an invitation, once access to the portal is granted, you will need to submit a request for public assistance by clicking on the hyperlink stating, "Please click here to begin RPA submission process." Then follow the instructions for submittal. Note, if you are a private nonprofit, there are additional documentation requirements, and examples include a current ruling letter for the Internal Revenue Service granting tax exemption under sections 501(c), D, or E, or documentation from the state substantiating you are a non-revenue producing nonprofit entity. Proof of ownership of owned facilities. If you lease a facility, proof of legal responsibility to repair the incident-related damage, a list of services provided in the facility and when and to whom. Once submitted, the RPA is routed for eligibility determinations, first by MEMA, then by FEMA. The PDMG serves as the primary FEMA point of contact for the applicant, helping to conduct meetings, assist with all aspects of the grants portal, and assist with coordination between FEMA, the state, and applicants. We cannot state enough how important it is to document everything related to the incident for which you're going to request reimbursement. While documentation requirements have changed for large and small project submittal for FEMA and the state, for best practices and the potential for audits, we are still advising applicants to keep 100% of documentation should questions arise down the road during closeout. It is much easier to gather this documentation as the work is being done rather than years later when the auditing and closeout occurs. Collecting this information now will save headaches later and be of a huge help. Projects are how FEMA organizes the expenses related to disaster recovery. All projects must meet the minimum $3,900 threshold. There is no upper limit, but there is a distinction as small for anything under $1 million. Projects can group all damages within a category together. Each damaged location does not need to be an independent project. For example, all of your culvert damages can be grouped together as a project. Each individual culvert repair does not have to be a project of its own, equaling $3,900. Small and large projects also have slightly different rules for closeout and documentation as well, but for projects of any size, we once again strongly recommend gathering and retaining 100% of the documentation for this work. We'll talk a bit more about what this entails in a moment. Project workbooks are the primary tool we use to list out the costs associated with the recovery expenses. Here you can see a sample. You'll be asked to fill out this Excel-based form with all the relevant information, including costs, invoice numbers, labor details, and purpose. You'll often have to include a narrative for some items that are immediately self-explanatory. This is a key area where your PDMG will be helpful in making sure the necessary details are input into this workbook so that as the project is submitted for approval, the chances for requests for information or RFIs or other hiccups from regional and national FEMA team members are minimized. The purpose of closeout is for the applicant to certify that all work has been completed. FEMA closes large projects individually as each is completed, and FEMA closes all small projects together when the last small project is completed. To ensure a timely closeout process, the applicant should notify MEMA immediately as it completes each large project and when it has completed its last small project. You will need 100% of documentation, including proof of payment, to complete the closeout process for any project over $500,000. Smaller projects, or those with various levels of risk, may also require 100% documentation and will be decided on a case-by-case basis and sample documentation. This will be coordinated for each applicant in conjunction with MEMA. It is still highly recommended to gather and retain 100% documentation for all eligible and obligated expenses for any project for 5 to 7 years. As noted here, if you disagree with a FEMA decision on your project, you have the opportunity to appeal. FEMA provides the applicant with 2 opportunities to appeal a determination. The first appeal is to the RA. If the applicant disagrees with the first appeal determination, it may submit a second appeal to the Assistant Administrator or the Recovery Directorate at FEMA headquarters. The applicant has 60 days to submit an appeal from receipt of notice for the action which is being appealed. At any point in the appeal process, the applicant may withdraw its appeal by submitting a written request to the recipient and FEMA. FEMA will then send a written acknowledgement to the recipient and applicant. All second appeal decisions represent the agency's final administrative decision on the matter. The 406 mitigation program is managed by the state under funding provided for in the Stafford Act. These mitigation efforts are funded via the Public Assistance or Infrastructure Program. As each applicant works with their PDMG to complete their reviews of damages at recovery scoping meetings and site visits, there will be a dedicated FEMA mitigation officer to assess 406 opportunities. 406 is applied on the parts of the facility that were damaged by the disaster, and the mitigation measure directly reduces the potential of future similar disaster damages to the eligible facility. The 404 mitigation program is managed by our mitigation officer, Heather Dumais. Here you see some of the basics. It is not dependent upon disaster damages. You must be in a county with a current approved mitigation plan. If this is of interest, we encourage you to reach out to Heather for more on this program. Our mitigation office also manages several other grant programs that can help communities be proactive in their resiliency. Again, please contact Heather for more information on how to pursue these grants. Here's Heather's contact information for any non-disaster related mitigation program opportunities. I'm now going to turn it back over to Naomi to close out this briefing.
Thanks, Harley. For those of you still hanging in with us, we only have a few more slides. Here are some important websites with information and tools that will assist you in managing your project applications. Also listed here is the information for individual assistance. We have been awarded a declaration for IA for this event as well. Please reach out to Kelsey Presex, our IA officer, if you have questions about obtaining assistance for those affected in your communities. Counties included in the IA declaration are Androscoggin, Franklin, Kennebec, Oxford, and Somerset. FEMA also has helpful resources such as independent study courses and a YouTube channel surrounding grants portal subjects. Again, to wrap up with these important key points, we also are here to provide support and answer questions. Don't forget to log into the FEMA grants portal and submit your request for public assistance by February 29th. If you need login information or password resets, please reach out to us at main.recovery@maine.gov. We continue to host virtual open office hours. One member or more of the MEMA PA team will be available to collect and answer questions and provide follow-up as needed. You'll only need to pop into the MS Teams meeting, ask for assistance, and we'll be there to help. If we can't answer your question on the spot, we'll take your information and get back to you with more details. These are for any PA-related issues, including trouble logging into grants portal, clarification on which step we're at in the process, what eligible category damages fall into, or guidance on working with other state agencies for permits. Links for these events can be obtained by emailing main.recovery@maine.gov. Thank you for your attention during this applicant briefing. We presented a lot of information in a short period of time. If you have specific questions or require additional assistance, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at main.recovery@maine.gov, and someone from the PA team will assist you. While we don't like the damages these events cause to our communities, we do enjoy and appreciate working with all of you.